Chapter 15, Religion. In this chapter, we will cover 3 modules. 45 is the sociological approach to religion, Module 46, world religions, and in Module 47, religious organization. These questions are 2 questions we will address in a look ahead. What social purpose does religion serve? And does religion help to hold society together or foster social change? Religion is a cultural universal. It is something that plays a very important role in people's lives. 4 billion people belong to the many religious faiths around the world. And sociologists want to know the social impact that religion has on individuals and institutions. Emil Durkheim, one of our early theorists, he studied and recognized the importance of religion in human societies. He noticed the individual relevance, but he stressed the social impact of religion. Religion is defined by Durkheim as a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things. Religion is a collective act. It includes many forms of behavior in which people interact with others. Durkheim was interested in religious behaviors within the social context. Durkheim argued that in religion, there is a distinction between transcending events and the everyday world. And these 2 distinctions are known as the sacred and the profane. So before we get into those 2 definitions, I want to just mention secularization. This is when religion's influence on other social institutions in a society diminishes. So that means, religion pulls back. It's not a part and integrated into the society. And we'll talk more about that. So now Durkheim was the first sociologist to recognize this importance of religion in human societies. So he believed religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things. Now, sacred includes elements beyond everyday life that inspire awe, they inspire respect, and they even inspire fear. People become part of this sacred realm by completing rituals such as prayer or sacrifice. And people's faith in the sacred helps them accept what they cannot understand. For example, many religious symbols have sacred significance for Christians, such as the cross, which represents, a crucifix for Christians. Also a Bible that is old, is never disposed of. It's just passed down from generation to generation. Now the profane, on the other hand, includes the ordinary or commonplace items. So items that are profane or common can become sacred. For example, a candelabra becomes sacred for Jews as a menorah. And a table can become sacred for Christians as an altar, or incense sticks for Taoists or Confucians. Contemporary sociologists look at the beliefs and functions of religion in order to understand its impact on the individual, on groups, and on society as a whole. So as I mentioned, sociologists are interested in the social impact of religion on individuals and institutions. We do not attempt to prove or disprove the divine or any divine revelation. Contemporary sociologists want to study religion in these 2 different ways. We want to study the norms and values of religious faith by examining any substantive beliefs and examining religion in terms of the social functions that it fulfills. So we examine religion by the social functions like providing social support or reinforcing social norms. Now you remember, as I mentioned 2 slides ago, when a religion's influence on other institutions diminishes, secularization is said to be occurring. And this is when religion remains in the private, individual, family spheres and is removed from the economic, political, and education sphere. They maintain their own norms separate from religious guidance. So those institutions are separate. Secularization means the separation of church and state. And this helps contribute to religious diversity through expression and organization, in that there is not one religion that dominates in all social institutions that I just mentioned. Then we're going to look at our sociological perspectives on religion, and the first is the functionalist perspective. Now, functionalists, according to functionalists, religion performs both manifest and latent functions. So I'll just remind you how we defined manifest and latent functions early on in the semester. So among its manifest or open and stated conscious functions, religion defines the spiritual world. It gives meaning to the divine, and it helps to explain things that are hard to understand. So it provides that explanation for events that are very difficult and challenging in a person's life. Latent functions of religion are unintended or covert, or those hidden unconscious functions. So even though the manifest function of a church is to provide for worship services, it may also provide a place for certain members to meet. It's a meeting ground for singles and elderly senior citizens. This is an example. Now, Durkheim viewed religion as an integrative power, or a social glue that holds society together. He called it a social glue. So religion gives, he says, meaning and purpose to our lives. It offers ultimate values and ends to hold in common. For example, occasions such as funerals, weddings, bar and bat mitzvahs, and confirmations serve to integrate people into larger communities by providing shared beliefs and values about the ultimate questions of life. Religion serves to bind people together during times of crisis and confusion. Researchers, for example, noted that immediately following September 11th, attendance at worship services in the United States increased dramatically. So right after 9/11, the tragedy of 9/11, more and more people turned to religion to help try to understand something that was incomprehensible. The integrative impact is evident for immigrants in that they help to integrate immigrants into their new homeland. So immigrants, for example, they'll settle near a parish church that offers services in their native language. For example, there's a church not far from where I live that has church services in Korean, so that the Korean members of the community can hear church services in their native language. Religion also strengthens social integration within specific faiths and denominations. Membership, people will share characteristics like the race and ethnicity and social class that help bind them together. Religion also socializes young children. So there is a socialization component through, CYO, or Catholic Youth Organization. There are sports, there are games and activities. It really starts at a very young age, and so many children are socialized into the faith. Religious loyalties can also be dysfunctional, in that, in the case of the Holocaust in Nazi Germany, we have cases of where religion can be dysfunctional. So in those religious loyalties where there's dysfunction, even in Northern Ireland, where you have Roman Catholics versus the Protestants, so nations can be torn apart based on, clashes largely based on religion. In the U.S., there's religious conflict evident among conservative and liberal denominations, for example, around large social issues, for example, abortion, gay marriage, and school prayer. These have been issues where people of different varying, be conservative and liberal ideas or denominations have different perspectives on those social factors. Now, many people turn to prayer during times of stress in their lives. So the religious emphasis on divine and supernatural allows us to do something about the crisis that we might face. Religion encourages people to view personal misfortunes as unimportant compared to the broader perspective, or as part of some divine purpose. I hear many people often say they're going to put it in God's hands, or they'll say things like it's God's will for this circumstance to occur. The faith-based community organizations have taken on more responsibilities in the area of social assistance. So we've seen, things like Hurricane Sandy, for example, that hit the New Jersey coast. Many church groups mobilized after such a natural disaster, raising money, raising donations, raising food and supplies, and then, taking trips to the area to help where they might be needed. There's also a government office that was established to give socially active religious groups access to government funding. Now, preliminary evidence has shown that this group has been very effective. Now, no divine answer to one person lives, to why one person may live a long life or another dies tragically at a relatively early age. We don't have that sort of divine answer if we ask that question, but it just helps us to kind of, put something in a higher divine, supernatural perspective when a crisis occurs. I want to talk about religion and social change. And the main theorist that we think of when it comes to this concept is Max Weber. If you remember, he was another one of our early theorists. Max Weber examined the connection between religious allegiance and capitalist development. His findings were presented in The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. That was his work that he published. So, followers of John Calvin, the leader of the Protestant Reformation, followed this Protestant ethic, which emphasized a disciplined work ethic, this worldly concerns, and a rational orientation for life. So a byproduct of this Protestant ethic is to accumulate savings for future investment. So if you work hard in this world, in this life, you're able to put aside some savings and then save for that future. So Weber's idea of the spirit of capitalism emerged as a generalized cultural trait rather than any specific religious tenet. So what Weber stressed is that the collective nature of religion has social consequences for society as a whole, and that the Protestant ethic was a very important factor in the growth of capitalism from 1500 to 1870. Many times the clergy are on the front lines of social change. Liberation theology is the use of the church as a political effort to eliminate poverty, discrimination, and other forms of social injustice. Activists believe that organized religion has a moral responsibility to take a public stand against the oppression of the poor, racial and ethnic minorities, and women. So there's this moral responsibility to stand against oppression. However, liberation theology may also be dysfunctional. Some Roman Catholics believe and have come to believe that by focusing on political and governmental injustice, clergy are no longer addressing their personal and spiritual needs, because being involved in activist movements is taking them away from the spirituality of their congregants. Now, Karl Marx suggested that religious actually impedes social change by encouraging oppressed people to focus on these otherworldly concerns rather than on their immediate poverty or exploitation. He viewed religion as an opiate, and called it an opiate, harmful to oppressed people, drugging them into submission by offering consolation for the harsh lives on earth. So, for example, many scriptures may teach that it is ideal to be poor and to have humility. So Marx believed that religion's promotion of social stability perpetuates social inequality. The dominant religion, he says, reinforces the interest of those in power. So, for example, women are often in subservient positions within Christian churches, and even in the home, carries over into the home. Marxists suggest that by creating this false consciousness among disadvantaged people, religion lessens collective political action. So to whatever degree religion may influence a person's social behavior, it also reinforces existing patterns of dominance and inequality. Now, if we take on the feminist perspective, there is a fundamental role that women play in religious socialization, specifically with children. So it's a mother's crucial role. They play a crucial role in the influence of children and child development. Women generally take a subordinate role in religious governance. Most faiths have a large tradition of exclusively male leadership. They're very patriarchal. Women play a vital role as volunteers and staff members and religious educators. In the U.S., women are much more likely than men to be affiliated with religion, to pray, to believe in God, to claim that religion is important in their lives, and to attend weekly worship services. So women compose about 17.6% of U.S. clergy, but account for 34% of students enrolled in theological institutions. About 4% of Roman Catholic congregations are led by women who hold non-ordained pastoral positions. So I've yet to break that glass ceiling. So here we have our basic perspectives on religion. The functionalist emphasizes religion as a source of social integration and unification, and religion as a source of social support. Conflict theorists view religion as a potential obstacle to structural social change. Religion as a potential source of structural change through liberation theology. Feminists view religion as an instrument of women's subordination, except for their role in religious socialization. And interactionists view religion, individual religious expression, through belief, ritual, and experience, which is what we're going to look at next. But first, I want to talk about the many world religions. About 84% of the world's population adheres to some religion. Christianity is the largest single faith. Islam is the second largest, and Islam is actually projected to grow faster than any other major world religious group. The followers of Islam are called Muslims, and Islam's holy scriptures are received from Allah by the Prophet Muhammad. Much more communal than Christianity in its expression, and Muslims vary sharply in their interpretation of several traditions. Now, Judaism is a monotheistic religion. It forms the historical basis for both Christianity and Islam. God's true nature is revealed in the Torah, a relatively small following compared to other major faiths. And again, it forms that historical foundation. Small, about 0.2% of the world's population. Hinduism is a major faith in India. It is a polytheistic, and it's distinguished by a belief in the rebirth by reincarnation. So it embraces a number of gods, Most worshippers are devoted to only one, but it is polytheistic, and there's the belief in reincarnation. Buddhism is based on the teaching of Siddhartha. It's founded in the teachings of Siddhartha, later called Buddha. Meditation is used to overcome selfish cravings for any physical and material pleasures. It developed in reaction to Hinduism, and as I mentioned, it uses meditation. The goal is to reach a state of enlightenment or nirvana, originally formed in India, but followers were driven out by the Hindus. So here you have the various major world religions, and it shows you here the percentages. So Buddhism is 6.9%, and it shows you what part, where the followers are located. Christianity, 31.2%, Hinduism, 15.1%, Islam is 24.1%, and Judaism is 0.2%. Here we have religious participation in selected countries. Malaysia has 45% attending religious services at least once a week or more. In the U.S., 36%. It's a pretty significant percentage. China has the smallest percent, 1%. So now I'd like to talk about the components of religion. Something that interactionists would be very interested in observing. All religions have certain elements in common that are expressed distinctly in each faith, and these are belief, rituals, and experience. So these patterns of religious behavior are what interest sociologists, interactionists in particular. Religious beliefs, religious rituals, and religious experience all help to define what is sacred and to differentiate the sacred from the profane. So first I'd like to talk about religious beliefs. Now, religious beliefs are statements to which members of a particular religion adhere. So for example, this idea of creationism is a religious belief, and there is, in this story of Adam and Eve found in Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament, many people strongly adhere to this biblical explanation of creation. That is a religious belief. Those who follow a very strict adherence to fundamental religious doctrines are known as fundamentalists, and they are found worldwide among most major religious groups. They were first applied to Protestants, but also Roman Catholics, Islam, and Judaism. Among fundamentalists, there is a literal application of scriptures or historical beliefs to today's world. So they apply those original doctrines and interpretations to the world today. In general, spirituality is not as strong in industrialized nations as in developing nations, much stronger there, except for here in the U.S., where the government actually encourages free religious expression. Now, religious rituals are practices required by or expected of members of a particular faith. And these can be as simple as saying grace before a meal, or as elaborate as canonizing a saint. Other examples could be just, attending a service, prayer, a communion. These are different types of rituals. For Muslims, an important ritual is the Hajj, a pilgrimage to the Grand Mosque in Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And this is expected at least once a year. So almost more than 2 million pilgrims descend and make this trip to Mecca. Rituals affirm beliefs and remind members of their religious duties. Religion develops distinctive norms to structure our behavior and uses. It uses sanctions to reward or penalize behavior. So some of the rewards are things like a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, confirmations, where you get gifts and parties to celebrate. Penalties can be as extreme as expulsion for violating religious norms. In recent decades, participation in religious rituals has either held steady or declined in most countries. In the US, Mexico, and South Africa, religious participation increased from 1981 to 2001. That was based on a survey that was conducted in 2001. Researchers usually measure religion based on participation to determine a person's religiosity. So it's really not enough to say, I am Jewish or I am Catholic. A person who attends and participates in religious service is a better indicator. And so often on a survey, we might ask, if someone has a particular religious faith that they may have been born into or that their family, that they're part of. And then we ask, how frequently do you attend, religious services? So it gives us a measure of religiosity. Religious experience refers to the feeling or perception of being in direct contact with the ultimate reality, such as the divine being, or of becoming overcome with religious emotion. Experiences at the pilgrimage to Mecca for Muslims, for example, or having a born-again experience among many Christians. So many people who have gone on these pilgrimages or feel that they're born again have this overwhelming, profound feeling of emotion, religious expression that they feel. And these are usually turning points in one's life. Baptists are also most likely to report such experiences as compared to either Catholics or Episcopalians. And this is based on a Gallup study that was done in 2009. So trying to, figure out, determine which religions might have more of these types of experience. There have been pilgrimages to a place called Medjugorje and in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Many Catholics and Christians go to these religious pilgrimages, and they come back feeling that they, overcome with religious emotion. So here we have the three components that interactionists are most interested in. Belief, which is a statement to which members of a particular religion adhere. Ritual, which is a practice required or expected of members of the faith. And experience, which is a feeling or perception of being in direct contact with the ultimate reality, or of being overcome with religious emotion. Now I'd like to talk about religious organization, because religion has become increasingly formalized. Specific structures, such as churches and synagogues, are created for worship, and individuals train for occupational roles. In earlier times, religion was largely a family activity. It was carried out in the home. It was actually a function of the family. And this formalization really helps separate the secular from the sacred part of one's life. Now, sociologists identify four basic forms of organization. And these four basic forms are based on size, power, the degree of commitment, and historical ties to other faiths. So we're going to talk about these four: ecclesiae, denominations, sect, and new religious movements or cults. First, ecclesiae. Now, an ecclesiae is a religious organization that claims to include most or all of the members of a society, and it's recognized as the national or official religion. So examples of this include Islam in Saudi Arabia and Buddhism in Thailand. Membership is by birth rather than a conscious decision, since all members of the society belong. So it's an ascribed status. Ecclesiae are generally conservative, and they do not challenge the leaders of secular government. Next, we have denominations. Now, a denomination is a large, organized religion that's not officially linked to the state or government. Like an ecclesiae, it tends to have an explicit set of beliefs, a defined system of authority, and a generally respected position in society. But a denomination lacks the official recognition and power that is held by an ecclesiae. Now, some Christian denominations in the United States are the outgrowth of ecclesiae in Europe. Roman Catholics, for example, Episcopalians and Lutherans, these were originally established in Europe. Roman Catholics or Roman Catholicism is the largest single denomination in the U.S. There are 24, and although it is, there are 24 other Christian faiths having 1 million or more members. Sects are relatively small religious groups that have really broken off from some other religious organization to renew what it considers the original version of the faith. Sects are usually fundamentally at odds with society and do not seek to become established national religions. They require intense commitment and a demonstration of belief by its members. Sects are often short-lived. Sociologist J. Milton Yinger in 1970 used the term established sect to describe a religious group that is the outgrowth of a sect yet remains isolated from society. And some examples of these are the Hutterites, Jehovah's Witness, the Seventh-day Adventists, and even the Amish. Now, a new religious movement or a cult, they're generally small, they're generally secretive religious groups that represent either a new religion or a major innovation of an existing faith. They're similar to sects in that they tend to be small and they're often viewed as less respectable than more established faiths. And sometimes many of these don't come into the public view or knowledge until something really tragic or something newsworthy may have happened. So for example, here's an example of a cult, was Heaven's Gate cult in 1997. Now this cult was, this was a cult that resulted, the Heaven's Gate cult in 1997 was a cult that resulted in the suicides of between 38 and 39 members because they believed the comet Hale-Bopp hit a spaceship on which they could catch a ride once they rid themselves of their earthly bodies. Now, Hale-Bopp was in science, and the scientific community was known to be, able to be traced in outer space. And then this cult really connected itself in using some religious tenets, so to make it somewhat believable to the members. Another example of this in our history is Jonestown, which is another cult in which a very charismatic leader by the name of Jim Jones and members drank fruit punch, which resulted in a mass suicide. Now this was very, well published in the news. I actually remember as a child seeing this broadcast on the news. It was probably the largest mass suicide in history. And again, connected to religion and sort of a utopia that allowed these people to believe this charismatic leader. And then things went devastatingly wrong, and then it became very noted that there were things that were not right within that community. It's where that expression, drink the Kool-Aid, comes from. Now, like sects, new religious movements may be transformed over time into other types of religious organizations. So there's not always, bad. Many of the denominations today that exist has started as new religious movements. The Christian Science Church, under the leadership of Mary Baker Eddy, began as a new religious movement and today exhibits the characteristics of a denomination. So most religions began as cults or new religious movements, including Christianity. Sociologists' study of religion in the U.S. focuses on denominations and sects, since no ecclesiae really exist in the United States. Now, ecclesiae, denominations, and sects are best studied along a continuum. In the U.S., for example, denominations would be at one end accommodating to the secular world, and sects would be at the other end, protesting against established religions. From an individual perspective, religion and spirituality is very fluid. People, for example, people may change the place of worship. They may even change denominations. And another sign of the fluidity is the rapid rise of electronic churches, televangelists, for example. Starting in the 1990s on the internet, we have YouTube, there's godtube.com. There's congregations on Second Life TV, which is where you have an avatar and it kind of has a large community that has an actual church that people can be a part of. The churches are changing to accommodate the growth in the youth and the membership. They tweet, they use Twitter, they use Facebook. Now, even within this coronavirus, with the COVID-19 and the pandemic, churches are going online, and so they're meeting their congregants in a way that technology has afforded that. So we're seeing, again, churches and synagogues and all kinds of places of worship are really trying to meet the needs of the people through technology. So here we have, the different characteristics of a particular form of religious organization, broken out in this table by ecclesiae, denomination, sects, and new religious movements or cults.